What does it look like when you take generative AI out into the real world? You might be picturing robots or futuristic smart homes, but today's guest is developing a fleet of autonomous long-haul trucks that are very different from the semi-self-driving cars we're seeing on the roads today. And using their unique training methods, the evolution of trucking may be only just the beginning.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Raquel Urtasun, the CEO and co-founder of Waabi, a company developing driverless long-haul trucks. I'm Becca, and here to talk all about bringing generative AI to the roads is my fabulous co-host,
Dominic Midori-Davis. And before we get into our conversation with Raquel, we have our two truths and a lie. So listen carefully, and at the end we'll tell you which one of these statements isn't true. Is a lie that Raquel got her start in academia, that replacing long-haul trucks with autonomous vehicles will require a large infrastructure overhaul, or that Waabi uses simulation to train their self-driving trucks before taking them out into the road.
Ooh, sounds like this will be a good episode. But before we dive into our conversation with Raquel, a quick reminder to rate and review the show. You can do so where you're already listening to this podcast, so super easy for you. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Raquel. Hi, Raquel. How's it going?
Fantastic. How are you doing?
Can't complain. Happy to have you on the show.
Happy to be here as well.
Perfect. Well, we should get right into it. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Waabi?
Yeah, so Waabi is a self-driving company that is bringing generative AI to the physical world. We are starting with self-driving trucks, but there is many, many more things that we are going to do in the future. But the idea is to bring level 4 trucks, no humans, to really robustify the supply chain and make safer roads for all of us.
No, that's so interesting because we hear and read a lot about autonomous vehicles, and it's always like an autonomous vehicle company as opposed to what you're saying where you're the generative AI company, but that's an area you're focusing on to start. So maybe if you want to walk us through that and sort of why trucking and why did that make sense to be the first area you guys were looking into?
Sure. So when I started the company, we built technology that is very general that can really be applied to any form factor, right? Whether it is humanoids, robotaxis, self-driving trucks. And when I studied a little bit the markets, it became very clear that self-driving trucking is the area where you can really build a product that can scale. And this is because, your potential customers really are in need of this technology. Human drivers, there is a driver shortage that is just growing over time. There is pervasive safety issues. And, for the customers, automation is really the only path forward. At the same time, it's a really use case that is relatively easy for this technology to actually solve. You can really scale this market quickly. And it's $1 trillion market, which is, one of the only few that still exists. So there is really the opportunity to build the next NVIDIA here.
And I'm definitely curious because I know your background, you've worked in the transportation space before, working with Uber and companies like that. But what got you really interested in launching this company and focusing on this area to begin with?
Yeah. So I've been working in AI for 25 years and, over 15 in self-driving now, almost 2 decades. And, I started as an academic. Then I moved to industry where to really, move from building cutting edge technology to really being pushing towards deploying this in the real world. And I saw 3.5 years ago a tremendous opportunity because the entire industry was going one way to what we call AB 1.0 or the traditional kind of hand engineer, very manual, very capital intensive approach that sincerely, I didn't think that was going to get us there to really be able to build a product that could scale. So, I took a bold bet, which is I started Waabi with very, very different technology with this idea of a single AI system that will be able to really solve all the tasks necessary for driving, which today we can, refer to it as generative AI or foundational model. But this was, pre the ChatGPT moment, right? It was a moment where, I could really see that it was really ripe for disruption, that GenAI was going to become a thing. And I took the bold bet. And today, 3.5 years after, it's incredible to see that this technology is really transformational. And we can, really launch a product, which we're going to do without a human next year, much faster, much more capital efficient, and much more scalable than, anybody else in the market.
And I'm so curious about timing because, of course, we know that not every AI company was started post ChatGPT, but there has been so many that hadn't happened yet when you started thinking about building Waabi. What gave you the conviction that the technology was in the right spot, or at least that AI had advanced enough that you could make this happen? Why was the timing right?
Yeah, so I spent the last more than 2 decades building this concept of an AI system that will be able to do reasoning like humans do. And kind of the evolution of the technology was such that we were at an impasse in the sense that we had the compute data as well as kind of the next generation of that technology, I thought that will provide everything that we needed to really build finally that scalable solution that I was referring to. So it was really like 2 decades of research that actually gave me that conviction. And what we did is not build just an LLM like ChatGPT for the physical world. We actually built a different generation of generative AI technology that is interpretable so that you can validate and verify that is provably safe, which is very, very important when you're actually working on a safety critical application such as self-driving. And we went all in. And as I said, it's amazing to see what you can do with this technology.
And while you're building a technology that essentially replaces one workforce, and although it might bring in another workforce, how do you think about the fact that essentially these cars are going to be self-driving and there are truckers? What happens to the truckers? How do you think about, building a technology that I guess in a way does replace human labor?
Yeah, so I would say that, it's important to first understand that it's not that one day this technology suddenly is available and the entire workforce has to, be looking for a different job, right? There is going to be a path to scaling this technology such that the workforce will be formed and deployed in better jobs than what they have today. And for me, as an AI scientist, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call me these days, I'm very, very motivated, and I really want to build technology that can empower us humans to have what I call more humanized jobs. If you look at being a long-haul truck driver, you need to go many weeks at a time, outside of your home. It's very hard to have a family. You have to go on these long trips where oftentimes you don't even have access to bathroom showers for many, many days in a row. So I don't think that humans should actually be doing this type of jobs. Instead, with this technology, that workforce is going to be working on terminals, it's going to be working on remote assistance solutions, etc., which will actually provide better jobs. And what we've seen through technology developments is that what it looks like potentially is a disruption for certain jobs is actually creating more jobs if the path to scaling that technology actually takes time. And that's what's going to happen with self-driving, that it will take time to get to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of those trucks. And, we will see a very, very positive influence in labor, not a negative disruption, as perhaps you hear from some folks.
And definitely staying on the topic of time, knowing that you guys were founded just a couple of years ago, you guys have been able to make pretty good progress thus far, knowing that you guys have plans to start launching physically next year. So maybe if you want to talk about that, how you guys have been able to scale the technology to this point, and definitely seem to be moving a lot faster than some of the other companies in the category.
So, if you are building a company with a traditional approach, you need many billions of dollars. I mean, you need, at least a decade plus to get there. So with that type of technology, this generative AI, we leapfrog all this. We also build a solution to what I call the data problem, which is we build a simulator that can really mimic reality the same as the world that we live in. And that enables us to really be even faster in the development so that we could train the brain of the self-driving vehicle to be much safer than any other prototype out there, and to be able to handle all the safety critical situations that otherwise are impossible to capture in the real world. So that was a tremendous enabler in terms of being 10 to 20 times faster, as well as more capital efficient compared to the rest of the industry. And it's all because of the, technological, I will say, development. So, we've been very well capitalized with 2 amazing fundraisers, rounds of financing, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about. And we are really on our path today in Texas. You can see our self-driving trucks driving autonomously on public roads, doing commercial loads with some of the largest shippers in North America in a daily basis. And, next year you will see those trucks without a human. So it's much faster path, but also it was a much safer path, thanks to the breakthrough on the simulation side.
And I wanted to ask you about the Texas piece, because knowing that you yourself are based in Canada, and yet you guys are rolling out these trucks on the roads in Texas, I wanted to ask why Texas, and I'm sure there's a great regulation question in there as well, of sort of like, why are you guys testing stuff down there as opposed to closer to home?
Yeah, so we are probably a Canadian company headquartered in Toronto. Half the company is actually in the US. Our US headquarters is in San Francisco, and we have, I guess, US employees across, several states. But why Texas? Very, very clear that regulatory is very positive in the states as well as in the states around it. A big part of the US freight goes through Texas. So it's part of, many of the routes that we would really like to automate as well. And it has become, not just for Waabi, but for almost every single competitor, kind of like the ground zero place where we are all in. And, as it relates to other markets like Canada, we will be coming later. But also I would say that the weather is part of why to choose Texas or, the south of the United States versus, starting in the north or starting in Canada, where our winters are pretty harsh.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it like so much of Texas is just like long, flat highways too? Like, I have never been to Texas, but from what I've heard of people driving through, especially West Texas, it sounds like a great place to kind of like throw a truck on the road because there's just not much going on.
yeah. I will argue that there's actually a lot going on in Texas. There is like quite a bit of traffic, and the weather is not as good as maybe we all thought to begin with, in the sense that you can get tornadoes, you can get really heavy winds, you can even get hail or snow, which we have seen, since we started the company. But, in general, it's really, from the economic perspective, also for the business side, it's a great place to start. And then from there, you can really expand, east, west, north, south, and kind of like cover the entire United States, which is what you will see Waabi do over the next couple of years.
Okay, so I took one of the self-driving cars last week in San Francisco, and there's been a question that's been killing me, and I feel like it probably has a simple answer, but how do you train these self-driving cars to drive through different terrains and different weathers? Because I was wondering, how does this car know how to go up a hill? Could it drive as easily in New York with all like the traffic? What if it's raining really hard? Like, how do you train a self-driving car to do all of these things? I feel like the answer is really simple, but I really don't know.
So the answer is actually not as simple as you think. It's one of the big key challenges. So your intuition is actually absolutely right, in the sense that there is many different things that these self-driving vehicles need to handle. And some of them are actually rare in terms of, how often do you see those things, and they still need to handle those when they happen, right? For example, you say heavy rain or hail or other weather phenomena. So without going into the specifics of the particular company that you took the ride from, so the way that, AV 1.0, kind of like the mainstream way of doing self-driving over the last, I would say, a decade or so, has been to try to come up with hand-engineered solutions to every one of these things that might actually happen. And that has been very, very non-scalable and cumbersome, because first, it's impossible to actually enumerate all those things. And then it becomes really, really hard to, how do I handle this situation versus that situation, etc. Right? If you're a human that's trying to kind of like incorporate that knowledge to a system by hand. So our approach for training the systems is the other way around, which is that the system can actually learn like humans do, which is by learning from data, by learning from experience. Now, if you learn on the road, that's dangerous, right? Because what if the system decides to unlearn something that is important? So this is why we built the simulator, where you can think of it as a digital clone of the world, where you can learn to drive, without any risk, in a way that you can expose the system to what if there is a deer crossing the street? What about if it's a child? What about if, this weather condition that is so rare, but it might happen? And it learns by experiencing and understanding the consequences of its actions. So that's the Waabi approach, which is very, very differentiated from what you will see in the industry, and is really, I would say, much more like how humans actually do or learn this task in the first place. But you're spot on in terms of this is actually one of the big difficulties in self-driving.
More from this conversation right after a quick break.
I'm curious because the way you guys are building this company, with it being so different from some of the other big AI companies we've seen, I mean, they existed before 2022, but we weren't talking about OpenAI very much before 2022. But with you guys building something so different, has the AI boom from the last 2 years helped you, or not as much if you guys are not necessarily following on the same path as some of those big companies?
So it has made perhaps the pitch easier, in the sense that, when I started the company, we call it AI first approach. For, the term generative AI didn't exist yet, or the term foundational model, right? So it has helped to people to understand, oh, that's what you were talking about. Oh, I understand now the revolution in the digital world, and I can understand that the next big frontier is the physical world. And I've seen how it can, no matter which metric you look at, the ChatGPT is like, it's incredible what, in terms of user penetration or performance or whatever is, your favorite metric, is incredible, like, kind of like how it's off the charts compared to any hand-engineered system that was what we saw in the market before. right? So that enabled us to actually make the analogy. But at the same time, people start asking us a lot of questions about what about hallucinations? What about this versus that? And that's where, we explain the why from the beginning we build a different type of generative AI technology that is efficient, that generalizes to the unknown, that at the same time is probably safe. So it has helped for people to understand, why it makes sense to do something like this. And at the same time, if you look at the market, right, Waabi is the provider of that technology. And that's also very, very clear, for example, to investors or partners as well. But I will say that, as an AI scientist, what is very interesting on the self-driving domain is that if you look at all the other founders, they are actually coming from a robotics kind of background. And I'm the only one coming from an AI background. And that's where we build very, very different technology. It's very, it's been very interesting. You're going to see more and more of AI-first companies.
That's such an interesting distinction. Following up on that last question, with you guys building something different than a lot of other AI companies, but with investors seemingly like running full force into the category, truly no matter what, it seems like, how has this impacted fundraising for you guys? Has it helped even though you guys are doing something different? Was fundraising good before? Like, what has fundraising been like in this company as investors' perception of AI has changed?
Yeah, and we just closed a massive Series B fundraiser, like 200 million US last June. And we actually went fundraising probably the worst moment for self-driving. This was just a little bit after the cruise accident that had really chilled the markets, I will say. And the macro was also pretty bad at the time in terms of investor sentiment and not wanted to necessarily do pre-revenue companies, etc. Right? So that was kind of the macro and the micro for the industry. But when we went on the market was, immediately cut through the noise, was very clear that this is very special. This is the disruptor for the entire self-driving industry and beyond, right? There is a tremendous opportunity here to build the next very, very large company for the physical world. And Waabi is that company that actually is the disruptor, right? So that's what explains why we have a tremendously successful Series B fundraise, very oversubscribed, with an incredible roster of investors as well.
And something I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned what happened with Cruise, and something that's always like weighed on my mind for people who build in this space is the concept of risk. I mean, if I build a B2B marketing software, even though everyone who listens to this podcast knows I am always shitting on SaaS companies, which I don't mean to, but if I build a B2B marketing company and it doesn't work, no one gets hurt. If I build a self-driving truck, it goes on the road and it doesn't work, someone of course could get hurt. And we've seen this, as you mentioned, with Cruise and some of the other companies building in this space. How do you personally think about risk building a company in this space that is essentially running huge robots on the road unmanned? How do you think about that as you plan or sort of just build the company in general?
Yeah, different companies have different risks. And, the way I think about this is that, for me, I spent, as I said before, almost 2 decades, right, on the pursuit of really bringing self-driving solutions to the market that will really enable safer roads. If we don't do anything, there is 30,000 people that die in the US alone, right? And these numbers, despite any technological developments, are not getting better. If any, are actually getting worse. So not doing anything also conveys a lot of risk in general for our society. Now, as it relates for the company as an investor, it's a different type of risk because you're not necessarily investing your money on just regular vehicles. So what has been tremendously important for us is to kind of elevate safety to the next level. Is what I call safety 2.0, which is that both in the development and the deployment of this technology, we build everything so that we minimize risk. So what do I mean by this is that typically in the self-driving industry, what you will see is teams, when they start a company, they try to quickly put a prototype on the road. And that prototype is not going to be very performant, obviously, because they just started. That is actually the opposite of our approach. So what did we do to start with is not to build a prototype of the hardware and the truck. We actually built the simulator so that we could have the ultimate test and trainer of the self-driving vehicle before we even build that vehicle. And that's to really enhance the safety of our development. And also we have the key to making the safety case and have a scientific way to prove that next year we will be safer than a very good human, driving a regular truck. So if you look at, our approach has been kind of the opposite. And also if you look at the industry today, it's all about let's drive millions of miles to discover, what are the things that rare cases and the things that we cannot do. For us is forget about that. Drive on the simulator and deploy a small fleet to start your commercial operations, and then deploy driverless when ready. So definitely super top of mind, and the investors really appreciate that. They really understand that. And I would say the other bit that they really like a lot when we went to the market is that Waabi has always had, these extremely ambitious milestones. When I started the company, I told, when I was pitching, it's like, we're going to build a simulator that's the same as the real world, and we're going to build a really performant truck from the beginning, and we will do this in less than 2 years, right? And many people were like, well, what are you talking about? That's impossible and whatnot. But what you've seen is that we've been executing always to all the milestones on time, or even earlier than on time, of what we actually said that we will do, and also with the same capital as we predicted. And this is unheard of in the industry, where, as you know, there is always, a number of months, a number of years away, but they just keep on moving those targets. So for us, we always hit our milestones, and that's something that the investors really appreciate. So, we are here to hit our milestones of driverless launch next year, and we will never compromise safety or anything to do that.
What other infrastructure needs to be built to kind of accommodate self-driving trucks? So I imagine, like, when you're shipping something, it has to go to like shipping yards and warehouses and all these other things that kind of put the whole supply chain thing in a loop. What other infrastructure needs to be built to accommodate this?
Yeah, fantastic question. So if you look at the industry today, the majority of the players are thinking of launching as a terminal-to-terminal model, where the idea is you have these terminals that are only for self-driving that are very close to the highway, where from terminal to terminal, you do shipments that are autonomously without a human. And then from the terminal to your customers, you actually have a human doing that last mile. Thanks to our technology, we can actually go directly to the end customer from day one. So we can go to their distribution centers. So we can remove the need to have these terminals, which removes a lot of the friction you see with this technology today, because the lanes that are done today, like Dallas to Houston, are very short. And adding a local shuttle from the terminal to the customer adds a lot of cost that customers are not necessarily willing to take. So thanks to, again, this ability to generalize and to scale of this technology, we don't need that infrastructure. And in terms of this technology, we build it so that it doesn't need dedicated lanes, so that it learns to interact with humans in a safe manner. It learns to reduce the risk for humans and for the vehicle itself. And, we will see when things are at the scale and things are mostly robots, then, it will actually be easier and safer. But we cannot wait for the infrastructure changes to actually deploy this technology and save lives. So very little infrastructure needs from our perspective. Yeah.
I wanted to switch gears just a little bit and ask a little bit more about you and sort of building the company on more of a personal angle. You've been in academia for a long time. And listeners, you can't see this, but she is sitting in front of a very complex looking math equation on a whiteboard that I'm sure would make my brain self-combust if I tried to actually read it. But what was it like coming from that space to launching a company? And I know you had some stuff in between and you still actually work in academia as well. Thinking about your past in the academic world, did you ever think you would launch a company?
Not at all. And it's been very, very interesting in the sense that, when I started, when I was, I guess, young and naive, it was all about the pursuit of building this new algorithmic or this concept of an artificial brain that can actually do the task that humans can. So it was all about the technology itself, right? And at the time, 25 years ago, we were in the infancy what we needed to build to get to where we are today, where we see tremendous positive disruption everywhere of this technology, right? So I was very, very focused on that kind of scientific challenge at the time, which is what really was required at the time, because we were so far from something that could actually also make an impact really on, I would say, on the world out there. So that makes sense. And in terms of some point through my career, I really wanted more than just that. I wanted to really deploy this technology. I wanted to really make sure that all the amazing positive impact was realized. So I joined industry, right? And I didn't build directly my own company. I joined a tech giant, you can say, right, with Uber, and where I spent almost 4 years. And it was the best, I would say, the best path towards building my company later on, because there is where I learned about hyperscale, what it means to build a business. Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, became a great mentor. I learned from him about what it is to be a great CEO. So there is many, many things that actually that experience as an executive there that I learned that had been fundamental to the success of Waabi today, I will say. And kind of the next natural path was that the industry was going one way, and I just didn't think that I was going to get us there. So building my own company and building a company in the way that I thought will be the best if you want to really deploy this technology and with the best people that are also incredible human beings, best in class in terms of technology, but also like who they are as people. It's been amazing to see. And this is kind of the next progressive or clear step in my career. And it turns out that I was born to actually be a CEO and a founder. I never thought that would be the case, but it turns out that my skill set actually fits well. And I learn on the job every single day. And it's been an incredible journey in the last 3.5 years. And this is just the beginning of where Waabi is going. It's amazing. Right? We are here to transform the world, and you're going to hear and see us front page, more and more and more.
Yeah. No, and I'm always so interested when people who come from an academic background are able to kind of take their research and what they've done in that space and turn it into a company. And based on what you've just said with working with Uber, did you consider becoming like an entrepreneur or trying to kind of like change where they were going or pitch it? Or were you just like, this is going in such a different direction than my research implies is a good idea? Like I need to launch? Like, I'm just always curious, how was it getting that tech out of the lab, out of the research stage, and building a company? And why didn't you decide to do this within Uber?
Yeah, so at Uber, I was chief scientist, and I was brought in to kind of like modernize with an AI lens the autonomy or the stack in general. And there is many, many incredible accomplishments that we did. And I spent some amazing 3.5 years over there. And so that I'm very, very proud of, everything that we did. So not really, but one of the things that became clear is that what you cannot do is take something that is built traditionally and try to modernize little by little to transform it into something else. And that became and this is where kind of like all the other companies are trapped in terms of they are seeing this Gen AI kind of very different approach, but they don't have the mindset, the people, the structures to actually go all into this direction. And that's where they are trapped today. And that's why I decided to leave Uber and then build Waabi, because the DNA of the company is very different. It's all rooted in bringing cutting-edge research and engineering together into a single team that is a small team, with all automation around. And that is very different from any of the other companies that you see in the industry today. So it's impossible to do it. And, you are, for example, a publicly traded company like some of our competitors. You can't just, tell your investors, wait, 2 years and I will show you how to do this in a modern way, right? You're just trapped in terms of that small incremental pace.
And we're just about at time. So I wanted to ask you, knowing that you guys, the way you guys are approaching the market, where you're a generative AI company and freight and trucking is where you're starting, what's next? You've raised all this money. You're looking to launch next year. Like, walk me through the next 5 years. Like, what is next for Waabi?
Yeah, so if you look at the next 5 years, you're going to see our self-driving trucks at the scale in North America and potentially beyond. And you're going to see us tackling the next form factor. And this next form factor could be whether it's robotaxis, whether it's warehouse robotics, whether it's humanoids, or any robot that can help us in our daily tasks. It's still TBD, like what is the next use case. But the very exciting thing is that we can reuse almost all the technology, so we can actually deploy on those new form factors really, really quickly. And as you see today with the population aging, with us not being able to do as much physical work or not wanting to do as much physical work, there's so many opportunities to really enhance our lives. And that's what you will see from us. Robots everywhere if you look at 10 years from today.
Well, that seems like a perfect place to wrap. So thank you so much, Raquel, for coming on the show. This has been fun.
Thank you for having me.
And that was our conversation with Raquel. Dom, what was the lie?
The lie was that replacing long-haul trucks with autonomous vehicles will require large infrastructure overhaul. It seems like it will.
Yeah, because she's saying it wouldn't, which I guess in some ways I would understand why not, because just from my limited experience with warehousing, just because my fiance managed a huge warehouse, is that the trucks all just pull into bays. So I guess if you send a truck from one bay to the next, like there really isn't much of a difference. It would still kind of go into the bay the same way. But I'm probably, like I said, I'm not a huge expert in this area. So that's probably like way too simple of an answer.
Yeah, I know nothing about shipping or bays, but I know that, well, stereotypically, I don't think much highly of American infrastructure. So I assume that any type of innovation is going to require some type of adaptation, especially in every single market in all of these different states. It just seems like it would be an effort that people will probably be really open to. But I definitely can see like how this might take some time to adapt every single like thing for something that's suitable for like a robot truck.
Right. One potential aspect to it is if these trucks are replacing these long haul truck drivers, but they need more people working on the infrastructure side or working with these trucks on either end. Like, seems like that could be a way these people sort of stay in the industry but don't actually drive the trucks themselves. And of course, she didn't say this is a hypothetical thing, but I did think I liked how she talked about how, yes, like these trucks will slowly replace humans in this line of work, but how based on the fact of the really strong negatives associated with this industry for human drivers. It's not good for you to sit like that. You're away from your family all the time. This industry does not pay well. I always talk about this book. But that book about grocery store supply chain had an entire section on long haul truckers. And it sounds like just the worst job you could ever have. And it doesn't feel like if she's like moving people away from this type of work into something more meaningful, it's like that is definitely a very thoughtful way of looking at using technology to replace human labor.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were any new skills that would need to be learned to work in the terminals.
Probably. But I mean, upskilling is not necessarily a bad thing if it gets people into like better, higher paying jobs.
Yeah, because being a trucker is definitely, every time I see one of them on the streets, well, first of all, I'm scared of them because they are so big. But I'm always like, thank you for your service because, wow.
Oh, yeah.
I remember one time in middle school, there was one girl when it was like, take your kids to work day. And one of the girls I went to school with went to work with her father, who was a truck driver. And I think that she had to get up like in the middle of the night or something to do like a 12-hour journey or something. And I was like, wow, that's like really intense. I was like, thank you for that. That's wow.
Yeah. And it's definitely, I think, of all the industries to like bring tech into, it's not an industry that has good luck with having like oversupply of people interested in doing this work. So it's not like, oh, AI is going to come in and all these people who've been applying into the space for years don't have a job. It's like, not really. They don't have enough drivers to begin with. That's why she probably talked about how it would like slowly replace people, because I'm sure there are a lot of companies who could just use this in addition to everyone they already employ.
I know we would have more trucks on the road probably.
Yeah. I just really liked this company's approach to building the trucks. Like, I don't cover self-driving cars and stuff super directly, but anytime you read about it, it's like, we're a self-driving car company or we're an autonomous car company, which of course the way stuff can be self-driving, the way stuff can be autonomous is using AI. And I like that she was like, no, like we're a generative AI company and we just happen to be working on long haul trucks. And I feel like that sets them up nicely to expand in the future into other categories that are like not related to self-driving at all if they choose to. And so I'd like never heard of someone talk about it in that way, even though of course all the other companies in this category really just are AI companies at the end of the day.
No, it was an interesting distinction. It's like how she came from academia, or like how she has an AI background and not like a robotics background, and how that makes their company different, right?
Exactly. Because when you think of self-driving cars and stuff, it's like, well, how do you start building the company? And it's like, you hire AI people. Her being like, yeah, my background's in AI, not mobility, not transportation, that ends up actually making a lot more sense.
Yeah, this will be interesting. I'm excited to start seeing them on the roads. I know they're doing simulations down in Texas, right?
Yeah. It's crazy to think of them coming on the road so quickly, but I do think of all the stuff I've read about this space, the way they talked about training the trucks prior was super interesting, like how they have all these online simulators and stuff like that. And like part of me believes that other self-driving car companies probably use something similar, but I definitely haven't heard them talk about it. It's like interesting to hear Waabi's approach of being like, oh yeah, we build all these scenarios and we drive the trucks virtually. And then we do that so many times before we even think of putting them on the road, even in like a closed experiment to see how they work.
Yeah, it's encouraging to hear all that, because sometimes when you listen to AI companies, they're like, we're just going to build this thing and then throw it on the road. But are you doing like testing? Like, what are you doing there? I feel like more of them should talk openly about the testing measures that they do, so people can feel a little bit more at ease. Because they make it seem like they just put that thing on the road and like it's learning on the go. But hearing that, no, they're doing tests down in Texas, I'm like, okay, so it's like, it's not like a new driver. It doesn't have like a permit, you know? It has a license.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting just to see what happens with this. Because, I mean, they start testing on the road next year, and there's definitely positive news out of the autonomous vehicle space, but a lot of it's pretty negative about stuff that's happening when these cars hit the road. And of course, these are not cars, they're ginormous tractor trailers. I'm like definitely interested to see like what happens next year. I feel more, like we were saying already, like I feel more confident about this company than some of the others I've heard of, but like I'm just glad they're testing in Texas. Not that anyone would ever test this in New York City, but like
that would be having to bust a U-turn. Oh my gosh. When I saw one of those like 18-wheelers bust a U-turn in the middle of like Midtown, I was like, these are skills that I don't know where you learn them. like I don't know how you learn that.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy. But you also brought up good points. Like what happens when because down in Florida, there's like a bunch of them all the time driving. What happens when a tire bursts? Does it like automatically, I imagine it must automatically sense it and then like pull over or something, but it could definitely get kind of messy. But I mean, because human drivers are messy. I guess we're just going to have to see.
No, you bring up such a good point though. Like what happens if they do blow a tire? Like it pulls over, but there's no human to like get out.
It just waits there and puts its thumb out and says like, hitchhiking.
It self-calls AAA.
It self-calls. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.